Before we go much further, I want to make sure that we have some common language between us. So let's talk a little bit about vocabulary, but I don't want this to put you off. I know plenty of sculptors that can't even name the deltoid. They'll know where it is, they know its general shape, they just never remember the name. That's fine. However you learn this, whether naming is part of it or not, is really largely irrelevant. You need to be able to sculpt it, so you need to know it's there, and if a couple of grunts is all you can muster to describe that shape, then that's fine with me, as long as you can sculpt it. In order for me to teach it, I have to use language. I've tried teaching it without, and it's much more difficult. So I'm going to make sure that we're talking just a common language, but don't let it stop you. Don't get caught up in knowing exactly what the frontal bone is, or the sphenoidal process, all of these things. So the first bone that we're really going to be looking at, the primary one that we're looking at, is up here in the top. And this is called the frontal bone. Off to the side of this, and up along the top, that's called the parietal. The occipital is in the back. We have the temporal bone, which has this part of the cheekbone in there. Inside here, really small, you have the sphenoid. It's just deep in there. You only see a sliver of it. And then connecting directly with the frontal bone and moving in towards the front of the face, we have the zygomatic. Zygomatic is also called the cheekbone, and the zygomatic connects with the maxilla, which is really the teeth. And the maxilla is forming the inside of this eye area. And then inside of the maxilla, we're going to have the nasal bones right up here along the top. The maxilla also has part of that opening for the nose. Then, of course, down here at the bottom, we have the mandible. So you'll hear me right now talking about the frontal bone. This is the most important. You'll hear me occasionally talking, well, you'll definitely hear me talking about the zygomatic and the maxilla and the nasal. Mandible, of course, we've already dealt with that to some extent. Rarely will I be talking about the occipital or the parietal or the temporal bones, although they all form this back part of the head, and it's really important to keep in mind where the high point is, and that it's right here with the parietal eminence. So you could say it's really close to the temporal bone, but up a little bit above that, and we just call it the parietal eminence. That's the high point. Either way, make a note of these, write these guys down, and pay specific attention to frontal bone, zygomatic, and maxilla. Those are the key. We're going to end up spending a lot of time talking about what happens here in the corner of the eye. We're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how the nose, the plane of the nose, gives way to the inside of the eye. That's one of the primary places people fall into trouble. It's just understanding the orbit of the eye, the mouth, the jaw, the nose, all of those at the end of the day are really easy. This inside corner is painful. Before we get to that, though, let's make sure that we have the frontal bone and its specific shape a little bit better described. So in terms of the forms that we have to be aware of, we've already spoken about the frontal eminence. That's really important. We've spoken about the overhang, what's known as the supraorbital margin. That terminates in that overhang, and we've also spoken about the glabella. We've spoken briefly of the superciliary arch. It's important to keep in mind that, let's say down here in the corner, if this is the glabella, this little pediment to a column, the column being the nose, if that's the glabella, the superciliary arch is basically going to be the McDonald's arches on top of that. So it's coming out here. On a male character, the superciliary arch can be pretty dominant along with the glabella. On a female, it just tends to get absorbed into the plane of the forehead. It just, you barely notice it. You have to put it in because it catches light, and it's one of those subtle things that reveals a strong sense of anatomy on your part, but it's very subtle in a female. What we really need to do right now, though, is take our overhang and establish the temporal line, what's known as the superior temporal line, meaning that there's a superior and an inferior. So if you ever see on creatures, you see this double shape coming in there, then the artist has put the superior and the inferior temporal line in there, and it really adds an aggressiveness to the creature. Anyways, we need to get the way that that temporal line flows into the overhang and really helps the overhang take shape. And it's actually an incredibly simple thing for us to do at this point. All you're really doing is with the trim dynamic brush, you're just going to blur these guys. Just like that. You're just cutting a notch in. I'm going to smooth out some of that up there. But that's it. We want to keep this slope. This is a beautiful slope. You want to keep that. In time, we might aggravate the shape of the glabella, moving it forward. But it's unlikely I'm going to alter that slope backwards for the overhang. That's a really nice slope. And it fit pretty perfectly with the sphere that we had. One of the benefits of a craftsman-like approach to sculpting. These things just happen naturally. Okay. Trim dynamic. We can further define that temporal line. And that's all it takes. Just a little bit of the trim dynamic. You have a nice little line in there. Smooth out some of this separation of space in here. And we're not doing too bad. The one thing I'm going to do next is make sure that the cheek and the brow have a very specific step pattern. You can see this, what I'm about to do, you can see this in Bridgman drawings. But if we were to start with the frontal eminence, then we'll have a move downwards, a step down to the brow, and then a step down to the cheek, and then a step off. You want to have that stair stepping. Boom, boom, boom. It's not in everybody, but it's fairly consistent across most people or enough people. Some people, you'll notice it if their face, the eyes and the brow, if it just looks really large, it might be partly that the overhang of the eye and the cheek are really in line with each other. In other people, you'll notice that there's really small eyes and big cheeks, and that has its own distinct shape. So I'm going to use a move brush and just gently tilt that in. That's all I did. Just a slight tilt Nothing significant. I don't want to get aggressive on it yet. But I might come into the cheek here and just straighten that out. It's nice to have a good strong cheek in there. So without too much work, that brow is in pretty good shape. The frontal bone, that is. I'd say the zygomatic and the temporal bone are in good shape. The mandible looks nice. What remains to be handled now is that portion I told you that just always causes problems. So this inner corner of the eye. So let's take a look at a little bit of reference and see if we can break this down into something more intelligible.